So now that we know how to work with the table a little bit, we can talk about accessibility with the table. In your Files panel, I'd like you to open Accessible Tables and Accessible Tables Before. Okay, if I take a look at my Accessible Tables file, I see it has a little bit more style than just a regular table because I have a little header at the top telling about the table, and I clearly have a bold area at the top for my table header. Now at the bottom of my table I also have, let me turn this off for a second so I can actually see. I'm going to just turn off my table widths. I also have part of my table that I'm going to use as a footer, and we've got some more information we'll talk about in just a minute here at the bottom of this. So for instance, if I put a table in like we did before, if I do an insert and table, this table was put in with the header at the top and the accessibility used for my caption and for my summary. Let me cancel out of that for a second. And what I get in my code is a place inside of my beginning table tag where I have a summary, and it's going to be my user group top contributing members. So it gives a description of what's actually inside of that table. And then I have a caption tag showing my top contributors. So that's my table caption. It's not anything that you have to have, but it's nice accessibility wise to include that. And I can also style that with CSS. I have a T head and a T body around each section. So in relatively large tables, the rows can be grouped into sections, giving the table a bit more form. So you can define a header and a footer and one or more body sections for each table using that TH, T-foot, and T-body tags. What is eventually hoped to achieve is that browsers that can see these tags can scroll the body of a table independently of a fixed header and footer. Also, if a table is long and printed, browsers could repeat header information for each page. So it can be very useful, and we can also use that to style things with. Dreamweaver can also run an accessibility validation report, and so it has that as a feature, and we can see whether anything conflicts with our document and a Section 508 guideline. The W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, says that you should provide summaries, you should identify row and column information, provide an abbreviation for our header labels, and provide a caption. So if no caption, then you provide a title. And if I come back up here, and let's just look at the code itself for this table. I have my table width in here. Now I could have used another tag for my table width, but we're just keeping things simple. I do have a class style for these for future use. And I have a scope in here. So my scope tells a range of cells to behave as though they are the header for those cells. And that way you don't have to define an ID attribute for those. And here's my abbreviation. So for my member name, it's just who. My abbreviation for camera used is just camera. And my abbreviation for number of images posted is just how many. So when I take a look at the rest of my table here, and I scroll all the way down, you'll see I eventually have some class styles for my table rows, and that's in preparation for the next lesson that talks about styling our table. Now at the very end here, we talk about my table sorter, and that really we will talk about more in depth with the next lesson and styling our table. Now in this lesson we're going to style our table. So I'm going to open Table Styled and Table Styled End so you can see what we're going to be doing. I'm going to go back over to my design. And I can see I have a table where my caption is styled, my headers are styled, I've got a background color, and I have an alternating row. So it makes my information stand out a little bit more. I also have my copyright footer styled at the bottom of my page. So that's my end that I'm looking at. let's take a look at our styled. It's partially styled, so I'm going to open up my CSS panel, and it looks like I've managed to move mine around a little bit. So I'm going to come back up to Designer and choose Designer and reset Designer. There we go, so I can actually see all my files the way that I would like them. So this table is only partially styled, and we're going to go ahead and finish styling this particular table. So I have so far my body just to define the font and the general color for the page. I have styled my caption already, so it is a font size of 1.3M and it's bold, and I have a little bit of padding on the bottom so it isn't that close to the table underneath it. And I happen to just kind of like the fact that it was uppercase instead of a mixed case. So for our styling, that's our table itself. So if I see in my tag inspector that I have an actual ID for this table. Now remember what we said about ID versus class styles. So we are assuming that this is going to be the only table of this style on the page. If we'd used a class style, we could have put multiple pages of that particular style on the page. Now, I have to admit I used an ID strictly so that it would be the only one on the page. Remember, we only use tables for data, and we don't lay out our page with them any longer, but they are very useful for data. So the last thing that we have styled over here is our TR, so our table row, and our TH, which is our table head. So that I have a background color here, it has a font color of white, it has a font size, and it has a little bit of padding on the bottom and on the top. Now we're going to style the cells themselves. So I'm just going to put my cursor in here so that I can see in my tag inspector where I'm at, that I'm in my TD. And I'm going to click on my new CSS rule. And I don't really necessarily need my T body tag at the moment. I'm just going to style my table row and my table data. So it'll be all of my table rows and my table data. And I will click OK because I really want my footer involved in that also. So I'm going to choose my font size of 1.2M. I'd like a little bit of border around all of my table data. So I'm going to go to my border and I'm going to choose solid. And it's just going to be 1 pixel. And I have a color that I would like to put in here. And since I know the color and I'm going to type it in, I want to put that pound sign in first. So it's going to be 98B F21. And if I come back over here, I see that actual color. I'd also like to make sure that everything is in the center, so I will just use center for my text align and click OK. So now I have a little bit more room in all of my cells. Oh, I actually don't, so let's put a little bit of padding in there. So for instance, I could either do that right here in my CSS panel, or I could double click this right here, and I'll just do that, and go to my box category and uncheck my padding. I'd like a little bit on top, so I will do a top and a bottom of 3, and just in case for the side, I'm going to go ahead and give that just a little bit of padding as well. That's a little bit too much, so let's make that 3 as well. Since I'm making it all 3, I can just click the same for all and click apply. Right, now I have a little bit more space. So we have every other row has a class style applied to it. So if I take a look at my code for just a second here, I see that my table row has a class style of alt. So when I go back to my design here, I just make sure that my cursor is sitting in a table row that has that alt to it, and I click my new CSS rule, and I'm going to get rid of my T body there, and I'm just going to put TR in here for my table row, and I'm getting rid of that extra space because I don't really need it because it is applied to that table row. And I'm going to click OK. I'm going to change my font color to black just so that it looks a little bit different than the dark gray. And I'm going to change my background color for these because everything else is really styled. And I'm just going to give that a little bit lighter of that green color. So it's going to be EAF 2D3. And if I click apply, then I can see that those table rows are now styled differently. So I'll click OK. And the last thing that we need to do is our footer. So I will scroll down a little bit and I'll put my cursor in that footer area. And I will add a new CSS rule. And I'm just going to keep that T foot in there because it is specifically for that. And I'm going to click OK. I want my font size to be a little bit smaller, so I'm going to use a 9.9M. So we get a little bit smaller font. If I click apply, I actually see that take place. I'd like it to be the same color as my header. So I'm going to make my font white, and I'm going to go to my background and give it that same darker green color. So a pound, and it's A7C942. And I click apply, and now I see that take place. So now, instead of just a boring table that's on the page, I have an accessible table that is also styled with CSS. Tables are no longer used to lay out a website, but they still have a purpose. In this chapter, we'll learn how best to use them. Besides, they can be styled with CSS. Let's look how we can do that now. Now that we've taken a look at CSS, we can take a look at tables and designing and making them accessible. So let's change our chapter files to the next chapter. So we'll go to our Files panel, and I'll choose Manage Sites. I'm just going to click on Edit since I already have it up here, or else you could click on New and we'd end up in the exact same place. I'm going to change that to 8, and I can either browse or I can change that to 8, and I can click OK. It's going to recreate the cache, and now I can say Done. Alright. So let's start with taking a look at tables themselves. So there's a page already in the site called tables.html. Go ahead and open that up. And we see that we've got a blank page. So there's plenty of different places that we can go to add tables into our site. If I take a look at my Insert panel, if I take a look at the Common area, I've got hyperlinks and email links and a table here. I have images and date and scripts and templates, and I also have layout and forms and data and spry and favorites. And even if I take a look at the layout area here, I can insert a div, same thing with my common area, and I scroll down here enough, I can even insert a table. Then I can also go up to my insert and choose a table from here. So let's just go ahead and do that. And I see that I've got a table. We can choose how many rows and how many columns, and let's just do our 3. Let's leave our table at 500 pixels. Notice that we can also do %. I get to choose my border thickness, my padding, and my cell spacing. Now with my padding and my spacing, remember we've already taken a look at our box model, so our table is a whole lot like our box model, where I have padding on the inside, and I have a margin, or in this case our cell spacing, on the outside of our cell. I have a header area that I can choose a left header, a top header, or both. The sections here and underneath can also be used for accessibility and styling for my table. So for instance, when I put a header in, I get, instead of a TD tag, we get a TH tag. And with my accessibility, I have a caption and a summary. So when I have a screen reader and somebody who can't read the page visually, then they're going to get a caption of what that table is about and a summary of what information is in that table, which is very helpful. So we're just going to put OK for now. We'll look at accessibility in just a little bit. Okay, so now I have my table on my page. And let me make sure I select it again here. I kind of clicked off of it. So I can give my table an ID. I can say how many rows and how many columns I have. I see that I've got a 500 pixel, that I didn't put any cell padding or any cell spacing in it. I have a border, and I also have some regular alignment. Now, this alignment all goes in my code, so I have to be aware of what's in my code and what I could actually style through CSS, and I could align my table through CSS. I could also apply a class style to my table as well. Now in the lower section of my property inspector, I see several other buttons where I can clear column width, I can convert my table widths to pixels, I can convert them to %, and I can clear my row heights. Now right now I don't have the visibility on to show the table width itself. So if I go up underneath my eyeball up here in the top part of my window, and I choose table widths, then I can also see where I can select a table, clear all heights, make all widths consistent, or hide a table width. And on the columns themselves, I can clear a column, insert a column to the left and to the right. And that is very, very handy, and that's certainly an easy way to work with tables. Now, if I take a look at the table itself, and I put my cursor exactly to the left of my table, I get a black arrow. That black arrow is going to show me that I can select that whole entire row at one time. And now if I take a look at my property inspector, I see that I'm able to merge those cells using spans. So when I merge those cells, I'm going to end up with a column span of 3. Let's go ahead and do that. And let's split our window so we can take a look at our code. And indeed, I have now a table. We scroll down so I can actually see it. My beginning table tag, my end table tag. I have my first table row, and it has a non-breaking space in it, but it has a column span of 3. Notice that all of my table cells have a non-breaking space in them, because on certain browsers, if there is not anything in that particular cell, then it will collapse. When it collapses, it kind of looks like it's being filled up. So it will definitely look different than the rest of the cells, and we don't want that. So to keep things consistent, and even if you don't have something in a particular cell, then there's a non-breaking space to make sure that it doesn't collapse. So let me move this over just a little bit again. And if I put my cursor in my cell here, and I drag down a little bit, and if I right-click, I see my contextual menu for my table. So I can select my table, I can merge my cells, I can insert my row and column and rows or columns here, which is kind of interesting because here I'm able to insert a row or a column and any number of them at a time above or below the selection I happen to be in. So I'm going to click OK. And if I select all those and I go ahead and merge those using my spans, then for that particular column now, I have a row span of 3. So that one, from here on out then, so I see my table row and I only see my 2 other cells in it because I no longer have 3. Because I have a row span of 3 for that one. Now, if I like using keyboard shortcuts, on the Mac it is Command M, and on the PC it's Control M. So we'll just click Control M since I'm on the PC. And now I have a new row directly above where I'm at. So we need to make sure and be aware of when we add it through our keyboard shortcut that it's just going to add it above where we happen to be at. Now, if I type something in here, and I'll just type text. And when I go to another cell, you'll notice that everything pushes apart. Now this is just part of a table because we don't have anything holding anything open with a table. So that's the great thing about using CSS also as opposed to a table. This is one reason why we don't use tables to lay out a page any longer, besides the fact that I get a fair amount of HTML with a table. Because sometimes people end up getting tables inside of another table, and honestly that just creates an awful lot of code on the page itself. Now remember, content loads before anything else does, so we want to be aware of how much code we actually have in our HTML on the page itself, what we call the client side, so what's actually being loaded when they've clicked on the page. So that's the part that's going to be loading first. So we want to make sure that it's nice and clean as much as possible with the code.